And we are on base on a base, and we'll come back to your point, Sarah Mervyn, and waiting bated breath, no doubt, for the mamash. We'll come more to that in a minute. But let's go back to the Gemara. If you remember, we were looking at exceptional rules of Eidim Zomimim. Eidim Zomimim normally, but Asis, remember the Pasuk, but Asisem lo kasher zomam, you do to them as they intended to do in their with their particular evidence. And there were some exceptional cases we looked at. There's a final one, which is Rabbi Akiva. If you remember, Rabbi Akiva, 1, 2, 3, 4 wide lines down, his statement, and then we'll pick up at the bottom of the Amud. That's based on base, 4 wide lines down. Rabbi Akiva, Mishum Rabbi Akiva Omru. They said in the name of Rabbi Akiva, Af ein mishalmin alpi atzmon. They do not pay if they themselves admit that they're Eidim Zomimim. We'll see more about that as we follow this through. A Mishomim Api Atzmon. And let's have a look at the case. Let's have a look here right at the end of the Gemara. I'm just trying to find another A Mishomim Kufer. Have a look at the Rashi. 7 narrow lines up. Ein mishalmi api atzmon. Im huzmu bebezdin. If they're found to be Eidim Zom, this is crucial. V'lo hispik ba'al din lahamidon bedin. And there wasn't enough time, whatever. There was not an opportunity for the Baal Din to lahamidon bedil an hazam moson. In other words, he then takes them to court. Once they're proven to be Eidim Zomimim, the individual takes them to court, and then the Beis Din will pronounce that they will have to pay. So that it's like 2 stages. One stage they're found to be Eidim Zomimim. Remember, they're found to be Eidim Zomimim because other witnesses come along and say, Imonu hoyisem, you were with us at this particular time, date. The place you say you weren't because you were somewhere else at that time. And then if he wants to, I suppose the original defendant then takes them to court, and they will have to pay say what they intended the other individual to pay if it's a payment case. But they run off. They come to another Beis Din, says Rashi. Vahodu, they admit that they are Eidim Zomimim. They are not believed. Now we'll have to follow this through with our Gemara today, because we now pick this up 3 lines up. See, there is a rule, what's called Hodoas Baldin Kameh Eidim. If someone comes to court and they say, on volition, they come and say, I owe this person £10,000, then Hodoas Baldin Kameh Eidim Domi, we're talking about financial, then, he says he owes this person money and he wants to clear himself of that debt. It may well be the other person says, I really don't remember this at all. But this person says, no, I owe you this amount of money. Then, Hodoas Badin Kameh Edim, and you do believe him, and he pays up. But this, it seems, if someone says they were Eidim Zomimim, they're not believed to pay up. Look at this. Mishum Rabbi Akiva, 3 lines up. Mishum Rabbi Akiva Omru. This is the statement we saw before. And then in between there, we looked at those other exceptions. But we're up 3 lines up from the end of the Gemara. My Talmud Rabbi Akiva. What is the reason that Rabbi Akiva, or the reason behind Rabbi Akiva's statement that he's not believed when it comes to Eidim Zomimim? Malcolm, good to see you. 3 lines up. So if somebody admits they're an Eid Zomim, that does not mean that they will have to pay. Says Rabbi Akiva, 3 lines up. Ma Talmud Rabbi Akiva. Kasova, he is of the opinion, Kanosahu, it's a fine. It means you're not paying compensation. You didn't, I don't know, smash up someone's car, and then of course you're paying compensation, which is fair enough. This Eidim Zom, the rule of Eidim Zomamim, it's not compensation, it's a straight fine, as you see. Kanosahi, or kanas ein mishalim al pi asma. A person does not, if you want to pay, you can pay, but the Bezdin will not enforce that if you come and admit a fine. If the Bezdin know nothing about it and you say we owe a fine, they will not enforce that. If they say you owe money for a debt, it's money, let's say compensation. You say you damaged someone, you broke the window. Then the Bezdin will say, "Well, we'll believe you," and you're making yourself chayiv. The Bezdin will then say, "Yes, you have to pay," once you've admitted it, but not if you admit a fine. Have a look at Rashi, please. 2 lines up from the end of the Omud. Ukalas einoi mishalim al pi atzmo. You don't pay a fine. You can, of course, pay it outside the Bezdin, drop him an envelope with the money. Anybody can do that. But it means the Bezdin will not enforce it. If you come and say that I admit that I am an Eid Zomim, they will not believe that. Look at this. The Chsiv Gabi Kefel, says Rashi, Asher Yashiun Elokim, says Gemara, Parat L'Mashiach Atzmo. If I can call upon you, Peter, please. Let's have a look at this. This is Shemos 22:8. So we're into Shemos, chapter 22, as we see it up on the screen. 22. Thank you. Oh, wow. Good. Straight down there. Posuk number. Here we are. That's it. Go back a little bit. The posuk we need is 8. That's true. But go back a little bit. We're talking here about a thief. And he's caught. Thank you. Go back to posuk 6. You give somebody begunav and it's stolen, and it talks about someone stolen an item, whatever it is. If the thief is caught, he pays. Now that's important. He pays double. Okay. Now what is double? Now of course he's got to make amends and pay up what he's stolen, but the fact that he's got an extra payment, that's clearly a fine. It's not compensation for anything. It's not damages. The rule is you pay 2 for kefil. Now, go to Posuk 8. In all, he says, Davar Pesha, misappropriation, fair enough. Whether it's an ox, those days, Chamor says, Salmal Kol Avedo Asher Yoma. If he says, this is it, and I really don't owe. Atu Elokim here means they come to Bezdin. Yovo Devar Shneim, if they're 2 parties. And if the Bezdin say that he has to pay, then he will pay 2 if he's a thief. And the Bezdin realize, and with witnesses, etc. And the Bezdin's conclusion is he's a thief. Asher Yashiun Elokim. Actually, it's Elohim there. If it doesn't mean God, although translated is God, it doesn't mean that. It means the Bezdin. If the Bezdin have said he is guilty, then he pays twice. He pays double payment, l're'ehu, to his friend. Now, notice those words, Asher Yashiun Elohim. If the Bezdin say he is chayav, now look at, in other words, guilty according to the Bezdin. Please now look at that Rashi on our Gemara. Thank you, Peter. So we talk about 2 seeing people. Thank you. 2 lines up again in the Gemara. Asher Yashiyun Elohim Parat. What's that word doing there? If the Bezdin says, obviously, if the Bezdin say he's guilty, you don't need that. We know about the Bezdin and how they work. But that's very important because the Gemara learns in Baba Kama, it's coming to tell something very specific. It's only if the Bezdin say he is chayiv, and we're talking about that extra payment, the double payment, then and only then, Parat, last line of the Gemara, is come to exclude the Mashia Asatzme. If a person comes forward and says they are a thief, they should pay double, the Bezdin, although normally, as I say, there is a rule, Hodoas Baldin, if somebody admits a payment, damages, they admit their car, whatever it was, damaged someone else's car, they admit that they stole something and they need to make, obviously repay, then the Bezdin said, look, if you're admitting it, fine. The Bezdin is then saying, yes, you have to pay it. But they will not enforce if a person admits a fine, and this is considered a fine in the view of Rabbi Akiva. And that's what our Gemara means. Rabbi Akiva holds, because Eidim Zomamim, the payment you make as a witness, as an Eid Zomim, you only intended, that's a fine. Now, there is a machlokas about that later on in this Gemara. We'll see that today, later on in the Perek. But do we understand what's going on here? Rabbi Akiva said if somebody admits that they are an Eid Zomim, they will not have to pay, although they admit they owe money. Yeah? So let's have continue on with the Gemara. Omar Rabba. Rabba explains the reasoning. Why is Eidim Zomamim a fine rather than compensation? Well, it's pretty obvious, if you like. Omar Rabba, tell you that I've got a proof. I've got a proof that it's a fine rather than compensation. Yeah. Shaharelo Osu Maisa, they haven't done anything, nothing's happened. We know the whole rule of Eidim Zomim is what they intended to do. They intended this person to make a payment. And even that intention, even if they intended someone to be killed, it's only an intention. The rule is only if they intended it to happen. And nevertheless, they can be chayav as a guilty of a capital punishment on themselves, or they'd have to pay Eidim Zomimim. Have a look at Rashi, last line. Hey, I've got a proof, says Rabba, de Kanosahi, that it is in fact a fine rather than compensation. Shari Hami'idim, someone who, or the witnesses that testify, benefesh, regarding someone, lo harga adam, they're not killing anybody because through their testimony, this individual is not killed. It's only what they intended. But no nerag adam al piem, no one's killed, nobody, no death actually occurred. Yeah, they testified that someone killed someone else. Other Eidim prove and say that they were imonu hoyisem, they are now Eidim Zomamim. No death therefore took place. In fact, their testimony is not followed through. Therefore, and nevertheless, they can be killed by asisem lo, or they would have to pay it must be a fine. That's not compensation. With me? Therefore, says Rabbi Akiva, if they admit, because of that posuk we saw before, it's only Asher Yashirun Elokim. If the Bezdin say that he is a thief, but if a person of their own bat, they come and say they are a thief and they should pay double, then they will not have to pay that extra payment. We saw there in that posuk. Similarly, the case of Eidim Zomimim. Okay? Omar Rav Nachman, says Rav Nachman, the last line of the Gemara. Taylor, I've got another proof. Sheharei momoin biad balim u'mishalmin. The money is still with the people. The balim means the owners, and nevertheless they're paying. That's Rab Nachman. Says for the Gemara on the next page, as we move to Daf Gimel. Thank you, Peter. The second attachment. My niu. Thank you. My niu de lo osu maisa. What Rab Nachman has said is exactly the same as Rabbah. In different words. You with me? What did Rabbah say? Rabbah says they didn't do anything. Nothing's happened. Yeah? It's not like they actually damaged someone's car. This is Eidim. So if they intended only for something to happen, they intended and said that Reuven owed Shimon the money, but nothing happened because they were found to be Eidim Zomim before money passed hands. Therefore, that's considered a fine rather than compensation. Rav Nachman says something which looks exactly the same. Money hasn't passed hands. Says the Gemara in Daf Gimel, my niu. What does it mean, my niu? Look at Rashi, interesting words, my niu. My niu, hi momoin biad balov, de ka'omer Rav Nachman. What does it mean? The words of Rav Nachman, when he said money hasn't moved hands, hainu, that's my niu. What does it mean? It's exactly the same as the lo naaseh maisa. No actions happened. Sha'adayin lo shilem. He still hadn't paid. If we can put it on mute, please, Peter. Elo shenigma dina l'shalem. You with me? There was only a verdict. No money actually passed hands. So Rab Nachman is saying exactly the same thing as Rabbah. Admit, correct? Says the Gemara, no. It's quite true. They both said the same thing. They said it in different words. They said it in different places. They said it in different yeshivas, if you like. They were saying the same point. And what really the Gemara should have said is V'chein Omer Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman says the same thing, slightly different words, but it comes to the same thing. Basically proving that Rabbi Akiva's view, which is it's a fine, it's not compensation. As it's a fine, therefore, if they admit that they are Eidim Zomamim and say we therefore owe money as Eidim Zomamim, they will not be, a Bezdin will not enforce that. If they came and said, we damaged someone's car, whatever it is, and therefore we are reliable, then people will say, well, if that's what you've said, then we believe you, and well, you'll have to pay if you're admitting that. If they admit that we owe money because of Eidim Zomim, the Bezdin will say, well, it's nothing to do with us. It's a fine. If you want to put it in an envelope, you can, but it's nothing to do with the Bezdin. Peter.
But if it's a fine,
yes,
does that mean that the victim or the falsely accused gets the money, or the Beis Din gets the money?
No, you're quite right. It does go to the victim or the planned victim, if you like. You're quite right. But nevertheless, it goes to him. It's not compensation as such because he hasn't lost that money. But nevertheless, he has been through all of this. Yes, there's been the suffering of coming to court, no doubt. But you can't say that just paying up the fine is really considered money. It's not a monetary payment in that way as compensation. It is a fine, and therefore this is the view of Rabbi Akiva. Question is whether you paskin like Rabbi Akiva. Merlin's got a question, I think.
My mind wandered, all that yawning going on in the background, but it was what is the Rashi? I don't know who it was. It wasn't me.
No, okay.
What's the proof? What's the proof from the Loos from Misa? The Rashi, Shaham, Eden Benefish, no Hulk.
No, it's when he says yeah, it's a svara. In other words, it's logical.
Yeah.
He's putting through a logical reason why it's not compensation. It's not compensation because no one has actually lost anything. No one actually was killed. The individuals themselves were not killed. The same with the money. No money passed hands, and therefore, why are these people paying the Adims, and why they're paying? They're paying because the Torah feels this is wrong what you did. You shouldn't have done it. You're going to feel it in your own pocket now. But it's not compensation. It's a fine. It's true, as Peter pointed out. Yes, it will go to the people who are actually there in court, and it was planned that they were meant to pay it. But in fact, it is a fine. That's what we're saying.
The posuk? Who was the posuk that?
No, there's no. That's logic. The posuk that we saw in Rashi was to tell us that a fine, if you admit a fine, the Beis Din does not enforce it. Because with the double payments, we're clearly paying. If you steal money, repaying is one thing, but why pay twice? The second one is a fine, and the posuk says that fine you only pay if Beis Din enforce it. If the person found to be a thief and Beis Din approved, they got witnesses, etc., then yes, Beis Din will say you've got to pay twice. But if, however, a person himself comes and says they're a thief, they might have to make up the first amount, but they would not have to pay the second amount. But let's have a look at the Peter.
Can I just quickly ask something? If you admit that there's a principle which I'd like you to explain if it's right, because I've never really understood it. The principle Ein Odom Meisim Atzmo Rosha.
Yes.
You can't make yourself into a criminal. And
no,
first, right?
No, that's true. But if you come to court and you say, I owe someone so much money, a loan, whatever it is, then you'd have to pay it up. I owe someone. You're not a criminal if sadly your car went into somebody, or I want to make amends.
Why can't one? If somebody comes and says I killed somebody, why do we not accept that? It's
no.
You just said before how it's like 100 Adim.
No, the posuk sapi shnai Adim yokum dovo. You need two witnesses for that. But
you just said it's like 100 Adim.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, Hados Baldin when it comes to financial matters, Kamer Adim. If you admit I owe money, whether it's a loan, a fee, whatever, I owe this person money, then the Beis Din will say, fine, if you're saying that. What we'll probably say is we won't, it's true, Eid on the Mesi Matzma Rosha, so there's one of the rules that's called Palginon Dibura. We will divide up his testimony. The part that he said he stole it, we won't believe that, but he said he owes the person money. Fine, if you owe the person money, that bit we will believe. Maybe you were just, trying to, why you said you were a thief, the Beis Din will not believe, but you are saying you owe the person money. You can understand it. Maybe they think it's the only way the other individual will accept the money if I say I took it from him. Otherwise, he will refuse to take it. So that's perhaps why he's saying that. I don't know. But whatever it is, they'll say you are admitting you owe the person money. Fine. But if you say I owe the person twice as much, then the second half of that, why are you paying the extra half? Oh, because it's a fine which is imposed on me. Well, no, we can't enforce that. That's what we're saying here. Worth seeing the Rambam, Peter. Have a look. Can you see 2 lines up? It says Kanosahu in the Gemara, 2 lines up on the previous Amud. I've got a superscript, little ches. You may have a different letter in your Gemara. If you do have a little letter, have you got a little letter next to the word Kanosa? 2 lines up. I don't know if you have. And if you do, it will take you to the top corner where you've got what's called the Ein Mishpat, their mitzvah, and that will tell you on that little ches on this page. It's the 8th source on this page. Tell you took at the Rambam Perik Yud Ches Halacha Hilchos Edus. So if we could do that, Halacha Ches, Peter, let's go for Halacha. Just want to see if we paskin like this rule of Rabbi Akiva or not. So we better go to texts. We better go for halacha. We better go for Mishnah Torah, Maimonides. Now, you'll need a bit of scrolling here till we get to Eidos testimony towards the end of the Rambam. Huge work, unbelievable work of the Rambam. Keep going down. Haflor, Avodah, no, this is temple, trespass, hold on, a bit more. Korbanot, no, we don't want that, a bit more. Further, Nazikin, we're getting towards the end. Nazikin, Kinyan, oh yeah, Mishpatim, here we are. One more, Shoftim, judgments, testimony, that's the one we want. And let's go for Perek Yud Ches 18. Oh, good. And let's scroll down to Halacha Ches. And we'll see if the Rambam is or is not paskening about Eidim Zomimim. Ooh, a lot of good translation there for us. 4, 5, 6, 7, and thank you. Chiyuv for Eidim Zomimim l'shalem, to pay up. B'mokum shechayovim l'shalem, in a place where they have to pay. Is, in other words, they're found to be Eidim Zomimim, they now have to pay a kanasu. This is a fine. Not everybody holds that, this is the view of Rabbi Akiva. That we'll have to see, wait for a couple of duffs still to come on that. Ulafikoch, therefore, ein mishalmim alpi atzmon. They would not pay by their own, if they admit admittance. Ketzad, what are we talking about here? What does this mean? Hareishehidu v'nechkru edusum b'veisdin. They've given their testimony. They've been examined. And they themselves say, actually, we are Eidim Zomimim. Nothing. They will not have to pay. Or even if they say we've been found to be Eidim Zomimim, we'll see about that. They're not. You cannot make yourself into Eidim Zomimim to have to pay. Now let's go back to our Gemara. And let's see how we get on with this next piece. We want to look into this mamash as well. That was the Ayin Takas Ayin. We'll quickly come back to that. Let's have a look at the Gemara, please. Omar Rav Yudah Omar Rav. Next piece. Now, worth remembering that according to the Rambam, most others agree that Rabbi Akiva, we paskin this view of Rabbi Akiva, you do not pay if you yourself admit you are an Eid Zomim. Okay? Now, Omar Rabbi Yudah Omar Rav. This goes back early. Rabbi Yehuda, in the name of Rav is considered premier division of the Amoraim. But of course, Rabbi Akiva would be a Tana. Now listen to this. Eid Zomim Mishalim Lefi Chelko. An Eid Zomim pays according to his part. That's it. That's the end of the statement. Says the Gemara, analyzing that statement, what does it mean? My Mishalem Lefi Chelko. What does it mean he pays according to his part? Elaim, if you'll tell me, Tahai Mishalem Palga, Bahai Mishalem Palga. In other words, two Eidim come along and say, Reuven owes Shimon £10,000. They're found to be Eidim Zomimim. Is this statement of Rabbi Yehuda saying that they pay £5,000 each? Says that he can't be telling us that because Tanino, we've in fact learned that. It will come up later on in the Gemara and Daf Hey So Mishnah, we've learned that. Mishalshin b'momoin ve'im mishalshin b'malkus. Now, what's this word mishalshin? Strictly speaking, you think it means divide into three. But no, but it could be from the word a shalish. A shalish is a third party, which means the following. Look at Rashi, please. Second line down. Mishalshin b'momoin im shloisha edim heim. If there are three witnesses, or four, mishalshelin beineim. What does that mean? Mishalshelin. They divide it. Now you can't divide it into three if there are four witnesses. Bezdin nasin shalish. A shalish means they are like a third party between the witnesses. That's what it means. A third party here means they will be the ones that will enforce what the judgment is. So don't get too hung up about dividing into three at this stage. According to Rashi's first interpretation, Mashalshin means the Bezdin act as a third party to ensure there is equality between the witnesses, and they each pay their part. You with me? Benem lahashvoisom, to equate, make them equal. Bepiroin ishtafichal. That is the first in translation of mishalshin. So even if there are five witnesses, mishalshin, according to that Mishnah, means we divide the 10, in my example, 10,000 pounds by 5, £2,000 each, and you'd still use a language of mishalshin for that, because mishalshin just means you have a third party, the Bezdin act in that capacity to divide up the payment. Inami, or another translation, hi mishalshin, when the Gemara says or the Mishnah actually, mishalshin, it's a lishna ba'alma, which means it's just an example. Don't get worried about that. Who? And it does mean we divide by 3. Machalkin hal piroin bein shloshton. If there happen to be 3, you divide it into 3. So this word mishalshin, it's just an example. Could have said we divide it. Then the Gemara should have used the word merabin. We divide by 4. So don't get hung up with this word mishalshin. It's just, we're taking an example. If there would have been 3 people, we divide it into 3, but we don't divide malchus. And that very interesting Gemara is in Daf Hey. In other words, if they're chayiv malchus, which is normally 39, as I say, depending on the doctor's certificate, the person can manage that. You don't divide if there are 3 people and they get 13 stripes each. Each one would get the full amount of malchus, but let's not worry about that because that's the Gemara later on. What we will
sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
Someone called Sarah has just joined.
I'm sorry, Peter. That was me. I'm sorry. I've joined 3
That's
times.
all right.
I'm using my wife's computer. Anyway, that didn't work.
We just thought your wife wanted to join in when that.
No. So now I'm just here twice. But actually, thank you, Peter, for interrupting. Because as we've been talking, can I just ask? I'm interested in this, the Shalshin not being 3, so Shlish being in that third party. But what about because you mentioned Palginon before, and now we've got the word. We just had Palgo. Does that mean? Is that strictly half? Or
no, it should mean dividing.
It also means dividing.
No, it also means divide. You're right, because you talk about a pelukta, which means there's a division.
Just a difference, yeah.
Could be a difference of opinion. Normally, plug actually does mean half.
No plug. No division.
Yeah, there's no division.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be 2. It could be low plug when you've got 3 or whatever. But normally plug is taken as half. But you're right. Just the same as we've seen mishalshin means we just we appoint a third party.
Different person.
Different a person outside of the witnesses. But it really just means that they will enforce that money is divided. So you're quite right. Mishalshin just means divide. A third party. Or the second interpretation, mishalshin means strictly we divide by 3. And it just happens to be an example of 3 people. Had they been 4, divide by 4. Yeah?
Right.
That's more a technical point on the word mishalshin, but the crucial point is that is a Mishnah. And we don't need Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rav telling me this din. If that's what he meant, that Eid Zomim Mishalim and Fi Chelko, there's your word Chelko, he pays his part. You don't need Rabbi Yehuda or Rav. You don't need Rav to tell us that. You with me? What was Rav adding that we already know from the Mishnah? Elo, okay, we're following this through. And don't forget, we're going to be focusing in a moment on Rabbi Akiva's statement, so hold on. Elo kagon de itzim, chad minayu. Maybe it means if one of them's found to be an Eid Zomim, then we divide up. So one of them, remember the Imonu Hayisem, two people say back to the £10,000. Two people come and say Reuben owed Shimon £10,000. One of them, two Adim come and say, you were with us in Bournemouth on that day playing golf. Don't know about the second chap, but you were. Is that what Rav Yehuda Omer Rav is telling us? That you divide up and he then pays just that part? Says the Gemara, you got it? Kagon the itzim chad minayu de meshalim. Beginning of the line is de meshalim palga didei. Says the Gemara umi meshalim. That's not true. He would pay nothing. Really? Why? For Tanya, we've got a brisa. Actually, it comes up elsewhere here as well. There's a rule from the Pasuk. Both of them need to be Eidim Zomim before any payments made. The whole rule of Eidim Zomim is both of them are found to be Eidim Zomim. You cannot have just one. So that can't be what Rav was telling us. Omar Rava says, Rava, a later Amora, explaining what Peshat was. But Omer, they say, Eidis Sheker Hey Adati. I gave false testimony. I was somewhere else. I never saw this. That's what they've said. Kol Kamine. You can't do that. Kiven Shehigid. Anyway, once you've given your testimony, you cannot retract a testimony. There's a rule about that. Have a look at Rashi. Kol kamini bits me off as a question. Can he now retract testimony so that the defendant will be exempt from paying? You can't do that. And that's learned, one of the rules. Gemara in Ksuvas, there's a posuk. Kivin shehigid. Once a person's given testimony, they cannot retract the testimony. So that's out. So once they've said they've given the testimony, that testimony will stand. Says the Gemara, "Ba'omer hey adnu v'huzabnu bebezdim." If they say we were found to be Eidim Zomimim in another Bezdin. That's when, have a look, hey Adnu, have a look at Rashi. This person says, Ani uploni, and this other individual, Ani uploni v'chaveiro eino moder. His friend doesn't admit, but he says, we were both found to be Eidim Zomimim in the Bezdin of wherever, right? And they come to another court and they say, he says, I am therefore an Eid Zomim, and therefore I want to pay as an Eid Zomim. And what Rav is telling us, therefore, is he will pay half. He's saying as we said before, he said both of us were Eidim Zomimim, because we said before you can't have just one Eid Zomim. So he's done all the things he needs to do, but the other person doesn't admit it, but he does. So he said, we're both Eidim Zomimim, and I certainly will have to pay out my £5,000. And Rava said, yes, he will have to pay up half in that case, because he's admitting he was an Eid Zomim. Says the Gemara, therefore, that's not going to be like we just saw Rabbi Akiva's view, and the Rambam and others say that we paskin like Rabbi Akiva. You cannot come forward and say, I am an Eid Zoimim, and then the Bezdin will enforce a payment. You could come forward and say, I'm a thief and I therefore want to pay, let's say, compensation. And they say, well, if you've admitted you owe him that money, then you have to pay it. You cannot say that for Eidim Zoimim, says Rabbi Akiva. That's the low Rabbi Akiva. The Ik Rabbi Akiva, because of the view of Rabbi Akiva, was you do not pay as an Eid Zoimim. You can't say you're an Eid Zoimim and Bezdin will say, okay, then you'd have to pay. You can't do that because it's not compensation, it's a fine. Continues the Gemara, no. Let's try and work this round with the view of Rabbi Akiva. Ela ba'omer he'adnu v'huzavnu v'bezdin plonu v'chuyavnu momai. This is the point, which means the plaintiff, the defendant, after the case that we were found to be Eidim Zoimim, took us to court, and we therefore had to pay money. The Bezdin have now, if you like, transferred that Eidim Zoimim into not a fine, it's now a payment from Bezdin. That is no longer a fine. Once they've actually announced, if you like, on the head, they've said, you owe this money. It's, have a look at Rashi. Bebezdin shehu zamnu v'he'midonu hanidon bedin. The plaintiff took us to court. Al hazmosenu, the fact that we were Eidim Zoimim. V'chivunu bebezdin. We were found to be chayav in Bezdin. This is beautiful. Look at this washing of Rashi. Umehahu shata. From that moment onwards, it is no longer a fine. It's been transferred from a fine into normal momoinahu gabayu. It becomes a payment which they owe. There's no difference now between a compensation payment or anything else. You can't say he's making himself into a Rosha Shekvahiru Shiuhu Elohim. They're saying Bezdin made us, and they've therefore caused this money to be transferred from normal compensation payments into a payment from the Bezdin. The Bezdin, they put their stamp on this and say, you owe so much money. We forget about what the reason is. We've now got a piece of paper which Bezdin have said, you owe so much money. Now, on that case, that fits in what we saw with Rabbi Akiva. He pays half the amount. So what's the chiddush? I might have thought it might have entered your mind, my mind. He can't make his friend pay. One aid is not enough. You need two aidim. And he is saying, both of us were Eidim Zoimim. So I might have thought you either pay the lot or you don't pay the lot. Remember, with Eidim Zoimim, you have to both be found to be Eidim Zoimim. That's true. Says Gemara, I might have thought he doesn't pay lo machayev kamash malon. It's not true. It's true. You do have to have both of them being Eidim Zoimim, but he said both of us were Eidim Zoimim.
Yeah.
So that's okay. He then says, we were taken to court, and the court said we had to make a payment. What payment were we going to make? A piece of paper stamped from the Bezdin saying, I owed 5,000 and my friend owed 5,000. That's what he says. Now, he can't make his friend chayav because there's only one witness. But he can make himself chayav because that payment, which was a fine, has now been transferred into a normal payment, and therefore he will have to pay that payment. So the conclusion of the Gemara is that fits in very nicely with Rabbi Akiva. Don't worry, we paskin like Rabbi Akiva, but so fine, this will fit in with it very nicely. And that is the end of that piece of Gemara. If we can now go on.
So they're coming to court now as plaintiffs, not as agents. Then they're the subject of the case. They're plaintiffs, so to speak.
Yeah, the plaintiffs about themselves. What he's saying
Yeah, they're not aging in this anymore. They're not
No. He's saying I owe. There's a Bezdin said that I'm high £5,000.
Yeah.
So Bezdin will say, fine, if that's you're giving, you can give testimony, as we say, Hodos Balin Kamedim, when it comes to monetary matters about yourself, you want to pay £5,000, fine. We're going to say fine. We would do the same and say you have to pay the 5,000. If you've admitted it in court, then you've got to pay it now. Whereas the other individual won't have to pay anything. You can't force the other person to pay. But it would. That's all we're saying in this case is you would pay half. I might have thought you don't pay half, because not only do you have to have both witnesses to be Eidim Zomim for it to be called Eidim Zomim, maybe the payments have to both be available or forced to be, if you like. That's not true. You can have individual payments.
In the earlier case, when you said you can't, the Eidim Zomim can't, they can't make themselves. They can't make
themselves into Eidim Zomim.
Yeah. So what would happen in a case? Not in this case. In this case, they've gone to court subsequently. But if in the earlier case they were found to be Eidim Zomim.
Oh, it's a very good point. What happens if? So let's go back to that. The case. Let's say the case which is not the case, but the case which was mentioned earlier. They come to court and they say he owed £10,000. Then one of them comes forward and says, I actually am an Eid Zomain. We're not going to believe him. We're not going to believe him because you can't change your testimony. So we will have to follow through that testimony that they gave originally. And therefore, that individual will have to pay £10,000, right? Then what happens? He had said he was an Eid Zoman. But it's not Eid Zoman anymore because that money's now been paid. So very interesting. If someone comes to the Bezdin and says, I owe £5,000 to this individual, not because of Eid Zomim anymore. I owe it because he paid £5,000. You with me? In that case, Mervyn, he'd have to pay the £5,000 because now he's not paying. If the money is actually transferred from A to B, he's now coming and saying it's as if I've stolen £5,000 from him. You with me? So explains the Ritva that the problem with that, yes, he would have to pay, but he's not paying it as an Eid Zomim. He's paying it because he made that individual lose £5,000, almost like a theft. You with me? And the problem, therefore, explains the Ritva is the Gemara couldn't say Eid Zomim, second line of the Gemara, Mishalim Leficha, because he's not paying because it's an Eid Zomim now. You with me? Subtle point. I think that's what you're getting at, is it not?
Yeah, Baruch Shukri Country, yeah.
No. Do you understand? The second line sounded, Rav said, Eid Zomim, he's not paying because it's an Eid Zomim. He's paying, if someone pays £5,000 and then he comes along and says, I owe him £5,000, he's not, then yes, he'd have to pay £5,000, but not because it's an Eid Zomim, because he forced.
So if no money had been transferred, then he would be b'choyev. He would not be b'choyev then.
Not as an Eid Zomim, he'd be mechuyev if he comes forward and said, I'm a liar, and I really owe him £5,000. Then Bezdin would say, if you say you owe him £5,000, not because of Eid Zomim,
because you can't
owe him because he paid the £5,000.
I understand, but if he hadn't have paid it,
right, if he hadn't paid it yet, then you won't believe him.
So there's no, because you can't make yourself
no, you can't make into any. You're quite right. So if he comes forward before the payment's been made or before the business said he has to pay,
there's no punishment for perjury or whatever.
No, the other punishments for perjury.
He's damaged. Would he not? He has damaged the fellow's reputation. Would there be some compensation for accusing somebody falsely?
Yeah, but that's not because of Eid Zomim. Eid Zomim.
No, exactly.
You're right. Yeah, if he has, you're right. If he comes forward and said, Yes, yes, yeah. That's a
Paying back what is the damage is done.
Yeah, you're right. There, if there will be damages for that, yes, but that's not what we're talking about when we talk about Eid Zomim. Eid Zomim is very specific. You pay the amount that was going to be paid, or if it's a payment. So let's now, just to conclude, we've gone over time. Anybody can come off if they want to. But let's go, Peter. Let's have a look at the Gemara that Sam raised with his probably doing his Daf Yomi, I suppose. He remembered Baba Kama paid Daled, I think it was. Let's go to Talmud. And let's go down to Baba Kama. There we are, 84a. I think Daf Yomi is not quite up to there yet. So obviously you're ahead of the game, Sam, in your Daf Yomi. And there's
previous cycle, yeah.
Oh, right. You're doing Chazorah from the previous time. Oh, fair enough. Okay. Yeah, the Gemara in the previous Talmud and on this Talmud goes through and keeps explaining why, when it says ayin tachas ayin, it can't possibly mean you actually remove the person's eye. One of the proofs actually is from the Pasuk in Emma. We spoke about this. It says because the damage you're meant to give him. So what, you're going to give him, knocked out his eye, you give him an eye on a plate? I mean, it's meaningless. So that was one of the proofs, lots of proofs. One of the Gemara explains that, imagine the person who damaged only has one eye. So you're going to make him completely blind, eye for an eye. Clearly, that would not be right. That wouldn't, and it wouldn't have one. What happens if the person's blind? And totally blind. It's meaningless. Anyway, but keep rolling down, and we'll get to Sam's view. Keep going, a bit more. It's quite a long way down. Various brises proving all this. Oh, slow, a bit slower. No, a bit more. The main beyond. No, not a bit more. Oh, let's see something. No, a bit more too. It's good towards the end of the. Oh, we're getting there. Nevish tachas nevish. These are all proofs that it can't possibly mean. Another bit more. No, a bit more too. We're getting there. No, more too. My kusha. No, keep going. Have we got to the end of Papa? No, a bit more too. It's a long onward. No, that's another proof of. No, that's another. Keep going. I lost it. Keep going. Have we gone too far? No, we haven't yet. Keep going. A bit more. Keep going. Gone too far. No, next line, next bit. Only up to line 18 here. This is the one you want, Rabbi Lezer. We're there.
There it is, yeah.
Section 19. Keep going a bit more. There we go. A brisa. Rabbi Lezer, the great Rabbi Lezer ben Horkanus. Ayin tachas ayin, he says mamish. And this is the point you wanted. I mean, mamish sounds like it really is. So what Sam was suggesting was at least there is what I know we may not paskin like that, but there is one view, isn't there? And if people want to come to a point of finger and say, you see, there is a view at least that we are very cruel. Rabbi Lezer, he says that posuk actually means mamish. Says the Gemara, how can it possibly mean mamish? Less like a whole honey tanoi. We've got so many tanoim before. Are you telling me he's on his own? He disagrees with everybody else, and with loads of logic we've had over a long piece of Gemara. This and the previous go, and Rabbi Lezer disagrees with all of that. He holds mamish. Keep going to the next section 20. Elo Omer Ravashi. Loima she'ein shomim oisa benizek ela b'mazik. What he means, Rabbi Ashi, he explains. Now, I know the word mamish normally would explain. Would you think mamish means exactly that. No. What mamash means here is when you do the valuation, imagine you've harmed someone, caused damage to someone else. We're talking about physical here. What you do is, mamash means you do it. Imagine you were doing exactly the same thing to him. That's what it means. That's the mamash. The mamash means it's exactly the same thing. Imagine you were doing it to him, and what would the monetary reduction be? Because there's going to be, it's a monetary payment here. We look at someone with an eye, without an eye, how much he can do with one arm, without an arm, etc. We focus it on it. That's what Rav Ashi says. When he says mamash, he means you do exactly the same thing to the person who is the one who caused the damage. That's the point. So the word Sam mamash actually fits in very nicely. It is exactly, you do exactly what you intended more than that. You actually did the damage, the person did the damage, caused the damage to someone else. Mamash, exactly the same thing, do to this, and that's the way you're going to value it. So you're going to value it, imagine it was him and this damage had happened to him. What would the value be? And then the word mamash fits in very nicely. Peter, if I can ask you to go to search to Maharal.
Can I just ask on the Rav Ashi, would this be his explanation of what Rabbi Eliezer meant, or would this be Kabbalah that he was taught this and he is transmitting this understanding of Rabbi Eliezer onwards?
I would think it would be the second. I mean, it's just not making it up.
Well, finding a potential scenario where this understanding of Rabbi Eliezer.
And it's not just a potential. It's always going to be like that. In other words, it is monetary. It's right. What it's saying is we've had so many arguments against that. It's, as you say, cruel, and besides the cruelty side and everything else, and the proofs, and nobody else says this. So Rav Ashi is therefore saying what he means, presumably with a tradition for this, that it means mamash, do exactly this. Imagine in monetary. You see, until now, we've always looked at, when we said it's monetary, you'd say monetary compensation for the one who was damaged, not the one who's causing the damage.
Yeah.
So Robert Lezer's actually focusing it very much on the person who caused the damage. Mamash, imagine you were doing exactly the same thing and then do your financial calculation. Have a look at the Maharal.
So, Norman, if you didn't have the word mamash, what would be? There'd be a fixed amount. It'd be a fixed.
No, you'd say, as we said before. No, you'd normally expect the valuation should be done on the person who was damaged before and without an arm. He's saying very differently. It's before and without an arm for the one who caused the damage.
Okay, well, that may be similar. I mean, I don't.
No, so the amount could be very different.
Well, I mean, one's a violin player, you mean?
Yeah, exactly. And the reason, let's look at this Maharal. We've spoken about this Maharal, but people know about the Maharal. Of course, we do. We've got his dates there, 1609. Yeah, Laurie, I know you've got to go. I wish you well. Very interesting reading this short, brief.
Norman, I really apologize because I know this was my question, but someone's waiting for me and I've got to go.
Okay.
I'll ask Mervyn to fill me in short.
Okay, we will do that. Okay.
I'm really sorry.
In a
Thank
word,
you very much.
In one word, before you go,
right.
We'll have a look at this with 2 minutes in a minute. But in one word, basically, the whole idea of this payment is that the person should feel for the other person. And that's why if you focus on the person who's caused the damage, it's not good enough just to make the payment. He has to come and ask Mechila. He's really got to feel. That's why it says, because the Maharal will ask the question, if it really means financial, why can't the Pasuk say so? And the answer, says the Maharal, is because, yes, it's the individual who caused the damage should be focusing on himself. And the only way he can do that is he's got to ask Mechila, imagine if this happened to you, what would you feel like? And that's the point. It's not just a monetary compensation. So with that, we'll let you go. All the best.
Thank you very much.
All the best.
So
have a look.
It's a very quick way of saying it. I mean, this mamash, I mean, sort of, the Torah could have said specifically, Mazik Yishalim, I don't know, whatever. It could have.
No, you're right. Yeah. I mean, that's what it caused the problems. But what he means by mamish means, you imagine it's exactly the same thing.
By much, it's just a sort of a circuitous way of showing.
I think it ties in. Look at this Gur Aryeh, if we can, and we'll close with this, as it's getting late here. Gur Aryeh on the Torah. Go to Vayikra.
I only can read of it anyway.
Very quickly. Go to Vayikra 24. There we are. Chapter 24. There we want possible 20. Thank you very much.
Sorry.
That's it. No. Very good. He's talking about. It says Loshen Nasina. You hand over. Now the bit I want to pick up is 1, 2, 3. Can you the intoma? That's you're exactly where your hand is. The intoma, which means you could ask Lomalo Kosfahaturi Yashalim Yodo O Mumoi for Ferush. Let him say. Oh no, we don't want that. No, we don't want that. We don't want that. We don't want that. The internal because no. Should be in it. 1 minute. Let's have a look. The internal because what is Shamla Yoda move the face of Inzik Kashish because of Kalu Yisi Commission or them to Shelby. Oh, that's right. The point being made here in the Maral is. And go to Shuvena. Hava Amina, where your arrow is, just go straight across. Hava Amina, Im Shilem Olav, Demei Yoda. Once he's paid, there exactly. Beginning of line is Demei. Demei, beginning of line. No, beginning of that line. Demei, yes. Down one. Yes. The point is this: why doesn't the prophet tell me very clearly? You just you pay financially, you pay the money. What's this? As we said, ayin tachas ayin, which yes looks like it really is an eye for an eye, because a person would think if it said you'd have to make a monetary payment, you're potter mikol v'kol. Once you've made the payment, you're exempt. You've done the job. You've paid. The ain hadover kain. It's not true. Even if he's paid up the value, Eino nifta mimenu. He's not exempt. V'yavakesh mimenu mechila. He needs to ask for forgiveness for yimchalo, as the Gemara says. Okay, that's all. Just those 2 lines I wanted to point out. Okay, we can go back. Thank you very much after all of that. So that the point that Maral's making, and it fits in very nicely with this mamish, the individual's got to feel, the one who caused the damage has to feel as if he really is suffering the same way that the other individual's suffering. So if you'd say he just has to make a payment, that's it, you're exempt. You paid for the broken window that you broke with playing football or whatever it was in the old days, and fine, it's done. The damage is done. I've got a beautiful new window, and it's all over. That's not true. You've caused this damage, and you've got to feel as if it happened to you. And that's why it says an eye for an eye in that way. And that's why it says mamish, according to Rabbi Eliezer, because you're going to take that even further. Your mamish means the value is, what would you feel like if this happened to you? And that's this monetary compensation based on the one that's caused the damage. And you're quite right. The word mamish you'd expect really does mean for an eye for an eye. But what we're saying, according to Rav Ashi, is mamish, no. Exactly the damage you've caused, you've got to feel the same damage yourself. But it does mean monetary. So Rabbi Eliezer, therefore, is not disagreeing with all the other Tanoim. It is money. The only difference is the valuation on the person who caused the damage. With that, gentlemen, I wish you well. Yes, we are running late.
Okay. Are you on for next week?
Are we okay for next week, gentlemen?
Yeah.
Hopefully. We lost a couple of people here tonight. I think we can still say a quick 1-2-1 very quickly, Peter. Are we okay with 1-2-1? And then we'll close very late. For the lights.
Mark Nevis sent his apologies. His son Gidon has a very good friend who was one of those 21 who were killed.
Who's that?
Mark Nevis's son, who's in the army. His good friend was killed this week. So Mark is in Israel at the moment, and he sends his apologies for the shiur.
Oh wow! How is Gidon's okay?
Yeah.
Well, the same with Anthony's son,
who's here in London now. LD's here.
He's in London now.
Yeah. Getting ready for the wedding. And Mark has sent us all.
Yes, I know. We've sent we have contact there. Let's just Peter, if you can just bring up Tehillim 1-2-1.
We got
it. Oh, we can just say it ourselves.
Yomom Hashem Adonai Yishmerecho Kol Ra Yishmo Esnafecho Adonai Yishmo Zeisecho
אחינו כל בית ישראל עם ישראל מצאו שוויון עומדים בין ביום ובין ביבשה המחיים ירחם עליהם ויוצאים מצרים לברכו מיפהר אלה משיבו לגאולה השתא בעגלה ובזמן קרוב ונאמר אמן. Speedily for good news all around. Amen. So we should be well. Have a good week, everybody. And